So, joining me today is Carrie Gallant. She is an executive coach that I was able to meet during my conversational intelligence training with Judith E. Glaser. And Carrie, you were one of the facilitators in the peer groups, and I immediately gained respect for you for your depth and breadth of knowledge, not just of conversational intelligence, but of executive coaching and corporate coaching. So, welcome.
Thank you, Lynn. It's so delightful to be here with you today.
Well, I just want to jump right in and let the audience know we're going to sort of banter a bit. There'll be some things that we discuss that we have common ground on, and some things maybe you have more information than I do. So we're going to talk about corporate culture shifts and transitions within corporations. And I think both you and I have been hired to assist executives to affect some sort of change culturally.
Mm-hmm.
The question I have is, how do you go about working with a leader who consciously wants to bring about a cultural change? How do you go about, and maybe it's toward a particular focus, often it is, how do you start an engagement like that? How do you tackle that?
Well, thank you, Lynn. It's a great question. Sometimes when I first start working with a leader, whether it's a CEO of a company or somebody who's wanting to bring me in to help affect change in their organization, they might be at the senior vice president level or the senior manager level that want to bring me in. It's usually because there's something that's been simmering below the surface, or there's something that's on the surface. There's a problem that the organization is trying to deal with, and what I want to find out from them, first of all, is can we talk to the people who are at the top? Can we talk to the people who are the real decision makers here? Who are the real decision makers? And so often, it may be somebody up higher. It might actually be somebody laterally who actually does have a great deal of influence in the organization over that particular area. What I really want to know is what is the leader's viewpoint of the organization? What are their goals for? What are they trying to achieve overall? And how does this culture shift, or this problem that they're trying to address, how does that fare in the overall context of the organization? What type of or level of attention will it get?
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Like what you're looking for is, do we have the right stakeholders, the decision makers? What's the vision? I like how you said it, something simmering below the surface. And I'm going to share one, and then I'd like you to share some of what might those be for coaches who are listening or executives who are listening. Give them an example of what we mean.
Mm-hmm.
So in in a recent engagement, I was brought in, and the first thing the CEO handed me. So I was sitting with CEO, the senior VP of HR, and another member of HR, and he handed me a photo, and he said, "Here's what's wrong with our culture." And I looked at it, and he basically said, "Every one of those people is male. Every one of those people is white."
Mm.
And that was my introduction. And his cultural change was around diversity and leadership and inclusion. So that would be something that maybe it's simmering below the surface. Maybe we don't talk about it out loud, but it's being spoken about in private conversations, per se, maybe. What have you run into?
Oh gosh, that's a great question, Lynn. It's so interesting. I love that leader came to you with that picture, and seeing that there's something wrong with that picture. One of the things that's been so wonderful and heartening to me today is that we're having more and more awareness and more desire to fix that picture. When I was coming up and coming out into the world in my world as a lawyer, that was, we didn't talk about that. It was really tough to even get a wedge in the door to talk about why that might be a problem, or why it was so difficult for women to break into the ranks. It's funny, I just this morning saw a headline for an article that said women and people of color are still facing things like "you don't look like a lawyer." That phrase.
Oh my goodness.
And I didn't even read the article, Lynn, but it just told me volumes about what was going on, right? And so that's, in a way, that's kind of symptomatic that there's an issue here. that there's biases. I mean, I wrote a paper in law school where I was doing a pretend dialogue between a judge and a student who was, of course, a woman, and talking about what neutrality meant to be on the bench, and how did one deal with biases. And that was like years and years ago. It's so fascinating to see that that's really now what we're talking about. It's actually now more commonplace to be talking about biases. And so this to me is like the entry point. So when I say simmering below the surface, often it are things like unconscious prejudices or biases, assumptions that we're holding about other people. And so the stuff that's simmering below the surface it's uncomfortable because we or they or whoever it is that's there facing it don't really know how to deal with it and are scared of it. And it's so human.
It is, it's human. Well, you've even told me one of the things that somebody wanted to tackle, and you wouldn't think it's scary, but they had to reach out for you, was creating a culture of negotiation.
Right.
Right? I'm being hired by a group that wants to create a culture of nonviolent communication, sort of the
Yeah.
compassionate communication. What would be two or three of the other things that you get hired for transformation within corporations?
Yeah. So, similar types of thing around managing conflict, being able to have better conversations, and many times it's about how do we get women into positions of leadership? How do we women get there? And then also how do we create a culture where it's possible for women, people of color, to succeed? What is it that's stopping them? Can we start to identify what those barriers are? Great first question, great awareness to have. And then are we walking the talk when we say we want to make these changes?
Yeah. And so I think that's a big one. Like there is a big awareness around women in organizations and diversity and inclusion. And somehow in our subconscious, there's a whole sector of us. And I know we are the majority. We may not be as vocal as we could be, or maybe in the future will be. But we sense that there is power in diversity. There is power in not like me, not like me. Where do we, this tension between we're not alike, but we can come up with something if we co-create that would be different than anything we've ever had before.
Mhm.
To use some Judith E. Glaser, the co-creation is going somewhere where the prefrontal cortex and the heart and the gut aligning with another. So I kind of want to ask, well, let's set up, when we finish this discussion, let's set up a roadmap of how we got the opportunity to get hired, because a lot of people will be coaches, and then how we mapped out how we would run transformation. But I want to ask, is there anything else you want to say about corporate transformation before you and I actually kind of plot out how some of our engagements have flown?
Yeah, something I see, not necessarily in my clients specifically, but in various industries, is when it comes to areas like diversity, inclusion, and what has for a long time been called women's issues in the workplace, is
Yeah.
we tend to marginalize and or think that we're doing enough, or think that as an organization we've checked off the box. I'm going to check it off the other way for you. um, when we've had something like a women's group, or a women's affinity group, or a women's circle, or a women's committee, or a First Nations committee, or whatever the non-dominant group is that we're trying to work with in diversity and inclusion to include, that it's enough to do that. And it's a good step, and it's never enough. It's insufficient. It's necessary and insufficient, if that makes sense from a mathematical equation type of,
It really does. It
right?
does. I get
Yeah.
it.
I see it over and over again, and especially in the older, tougher, perhaps more intransigent, more difficult professions to change because they've been doing the same thing the same way for decades, almost hundreds of years, if you like. It's harder and harder to shift the balance, even if there's awareness, like the CEO came to you with that photo and said, "There's something wrong with this picture. Help us fix it."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. I think that the cultural change is really, and you said this first, and I'm picking it up because you said this to me earlier. Cultural change and transformation goes way beyond lip service. There is action. So I'm going to give a roadmap really quick of a recent engagement. I won't name the company, but I can name a few of the things that we were working on. And one is to elevate the sense of female leadership in the company.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked on it from two tiers. First, I had to meet with the top of the top, the decision makers, the people who were driving the initiative.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've already made that point.
Yeah.
They found out about me because I had done a speech at a women's conference with a women's chamber, business chamber, chamber of commerce. And so one of the members of the team had heard me put my name in the hat. I came in and expressed what I could do, and we did a lunch and learn with some of the decision makers, with the three decision makers and about five of the corporate executives. And that was just to see how well I could interplay. And that was just our test. And that was something I asked for. I just said, look, I don't want to tell you what I can do. I want to show you and see if it fits, right? So I was willing to put my brand out there and do a small engagement to see if it fits. I'm actually duplicating that this year with another corporation, but a small bite-sized chunk. So it's a lunch and learn. They paid me for my time. I traveled there. I gave the presentation. I had a debrief. I traveled home. From that, they said, yes, it's a fit. So we built a two-tier. We built a 12-month engagement with only the women. Remember, the focus was, so you need to have a focus. I think you have one on negotiating, creating a negotiating culture. On mine, it's creating a culture of inclusion and female leadership. So we took 450 of the women in this corporation across the globe where they are. And once a month, we're having a seminar where we cover a topic. A female thought leader is sharing the topic. There's pre-work that they can read or not read. There's the topic and discussion presented. And then the group itself, the company itself created a women in leadership sort of ambassador program. So these particular females were shown how to become ambassadors and facilitate small groups. And so after each little summit, there's a one-pager that they take and have discussion. And then I have a coaching challenge that goes out once a quarter. It's just virtual. So throughout this year, we've been covering these topics, building and boosting confidence and the competence and the connectivity of the women already in the company. On another level, I'm doing group coaching, which goes for 7 months with a cohort. We have 5 cohorts. Each cohort has between 15 and 20 members, male and female leadership. And I'm taking them through the concepts of conversational intelligence as a means to boost the culture toward greater connection, greater co-creation. So each month we have a meeting where I do the group coaching on the concepts, and then afterward there's coaching each week on applying the information in a 30-minute call each month to follow up on what we have been discussing. Plus, they're tracking the home play that comes in, that's what we call it. So each person that completes 90% of the things that we're asking them to play with, experiment with, there's going to be a graduation and they receive some kind of reward. So what we're seeing now is the culture shifting to more common language, more awareness around what diversity and inclusion, especially if we have more female leaders and a more diverse group of leaders at the table, what that's doing. And the key is we're debriefing each of these cohorts that come through. We'll finish up the year and figure out what the next step is for the next year. But that's how we started to introduce the transformation, having it happen very granularly. So that's a roadmap if anyone's listening, one way that I've done it. Carrie, I'm even now more interested now I've given you a chance to think. How have you mapped out cultural change?
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, Lynn, I love your roadmap. I love the depth and breadth that you've described for the journey that you're helping them go on. And it's that kind of, it's recognizing that this kind of stuff happens over time, that change, especially that integral change that requires not only the change in self, but doesn't, I'm not really going to say this, and it doesn't necessarily require the change in other, but to be open to the change in the dynamic. So it's the pieces that you're helping each individual woman bring into her own leadership that's obviously going to then spill over and have that ripple effect outwards as they are leading in a different way, how their teams will respond, how their peers will respond, and ultimately everyone else in the organization, how we can influence through that ripple. I love it.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for pointing that out and making kind of the invisible visible. And I will say that each step of the way, each of these engagements were co-created with the leadership. It wasn't just me coming in and saying, let me tell you how we're going to do this.
Right.
We thought around the table. We co-created what the offering actually looked like at the end of the day before we signed our agreement. So you probably do that too. But now I'm really curious. Now I've shared what I know on one level. Would you share from your?
I will. Yeah. So I'll give you an example of an organization where I've gone in and done some what I might call negotiation enculturation. And why would we even be thinking about a culture of negotiation? Well, it's interesting, right? Because if an organization, most businesses are doing some kind of negotiation. Most people are, we're all actually negotiating every day. We're probably just not aware of what we actually are negotiating.
Right.
But for any business to be successful, my business, your business, we need to be negotiating with others in terms of the relationships that we're going to be engaging in. Whether it's, you and I getting together to be on this call together, we had to negotiate a time frame and what we're going to talk about, those kinds of things. That's a fairly low level negotiation. But most businesses are looking to negotiate with suppliers, negotiate with other providers, internal negotiations, how we're influencing our teams, even as leaders. And how we go about negotiating can have a great deal of influence on our outcomes. So we can negotiate like some people do in an aggressive manner, and that might work in certain situations, but the vast majority of our negotiations are actually taking place in the context of a relationship, i.e. in the sense that we're going to be doing together after this deal or this agreement is concluded. We need to work together even just to implement that particular agreement. And so how do we do that? How do we create that? And so some of the organizations I've had the great fortune to work with over the last decade or so, I'm thinking about one in particular I started working with about 10 years ago with the CEO who was brought in after a private equity firm had bought a family-owned company. And he had worked with our methodology in his previous company, and so he decided he wanted to bring it in because he felt it would make a way of giving, as you were saying in your arrangement just a minute ago, Lynn, it was giving them a common language.
Right.
So everybody in this company could have the same language when they're talking about preparing for a deal, preparing for a negotiation, even negotiating internally through HR matters. They were always going to be talking together and strengthening, right? You talked about your group of women, that when they come together, they get stronger as they're doing it together. We like to do things in community because we know, hey, I can see them doing it, then I can do it too. Or I can go to my peer and say, hey, I'm really having this struggle of trying to figure out how to work this negotiation. How would you handle it? Well, if everybody is trained and are coming from the same kind of common language within the organization, it makes things faster, smoother, better, easier to get to decisions internally, and then to take them outside in those outside dealings. Lynn, one of our clients, we've been the sole provider through an international global mining company. One of them, they saw that the health and longevity of their suppliers, rather than trying to win and beat each other at the game of negotiation, they saw that the health and longevity of their suppliers being in business was actually in their interests. So they recommended that their suppliers go to our training. Now you might think, oh, why would I ever send my quote competitor or my adversary to the same training so they have the same access to the same tools and skills that we have? Well, when they got to the table together, all of a sudden they're now talking the same language. So it made their dealings much more efficient. And it also meant that they were invested in the health of their supplier, right? Because it's all similar.
Ecosystem. So actually what happened was by sharing and opening it up and expanding, made the entire ecosystem healthier.
That's right.
For flow of income and longevity and
Information.
yes,
Yeah,
all of
all
it.
of it,
Yeah.
all of it. And so that's the one company I was telling you about that I was working with. So they brought me in at that point, and then they also then bought another company about 3 or 4 years later. And so when they brought us, actually 2 years later, brought us back in to do the same program, but with the new blended team. So it was a way of people from the new company and the existing company to come together and now not only be talking the same language, but use it as an incubator, as a place for them to get to know each other, right? So they were again talking common language, and part of it too, Lynn, in terms of the roadmap, because you asked me about that. It was about when I go in, I'm asked to come in with that. Is I don't just say here's an off the shelf program. We're going to just do this, like you said. Don't go in and just say here's what we do, and that's all you get. I spent a time on the phone with the CEO to find out what are the specific challenges that your organization is going through. What does success look like to you? So even to him, and then everybody who was coming to that particular program, every time we would start with an assessment. Where are you today? So
Mm.
design thinking asks, where am I at? I'm here. We have to know where here is before we can go there. Even Marshall Goldsmith talks about that. You can't get there from here. Well, you can get, well, I figure I'm looking for the title over there. So, oh yeah, what got you here won't get you there, right? Right. So we have to know where here is in order to know where there, how are we going to go to there. And so then, when we do the training program, then we're also staying in touch and assessing at 6 weeks. What have you been able to do? What's showing up? How are you implementing it? What's your result? 3 months later, same thing. So that there's a place for it to take out further along there. And having some one-on-one coaching, and even in a group setting over this lovely platform we now have called Zoom,
Right.
is, we can do that kind of an approach too, where we're getting to come together and say, okay, I'm trying this and I'm really struggling. So I was working on this when we got together in the workshop. I understand how to do it, but I can't quite figure out how to do it with this person. Or because things are never really the same in real life once we get them out there. We're trying them. As you know, we're always up against our old habits, how we've learned, our
Right.
subconscious that's telling us those biases and assumptions that we might be having. And that's one of the big things that I talk about a lot in anything that I do, including negotiation, is, well, what might be the assumption you're making about the other person? And what might be going on for them? Is when we can have that kind of empathy for that person who's on the other side of the table, which, by the way, I often encourage people to actually try and at least metaphorically sit on the same side of the table, if not physically, because it changes things.
It does. Yep, we have studies, ergonomic studies and whatnot, social studies that say when you're across from each other, it's adversarial, when you're side to side, it's collaborative, or like we like to say, co-creative.
Right, exactly, exactly. So similar kind of a roadmap, in terms of that ongoing engagement.
Mhm.
And I don't know about you, Lynn, but I've also been recently engaging with a lot more around the ROI of the qualitative aspects of coaching. We're knowing a lot more, as you and I have both been through the World Business and Executive Coaching Summit, who's now actively engaged in an ROI training program, which I'm blessed to be in the pilot program. So I'm really looking forward to bringing more of that into that qualitative aspect. It's fairly easy to measure the financial aspects of an engagement like a negotiation training or consulting program. But the qualitative aspects of it are often the things that are longer lasting. They move up, they take you into the next iteration, the next negotiation, the next relationship, and on and on and on it goes. And it's that qualitative aspect that I think is going to be the most powerful measure that we're going to gain moving forward.
It really is. When I was working at Franklin Covey, we
Mm.
had an ROI aspect where we actually had a branch that would assist us in finding ROI. And in my first, I was a associate director of a project management office, and the initiative for the cultural transformation was we were hemorrhaging at our project level. So we had a huge failure rate. And so we created the PMO, Project Management Innovation System. And in 9 months, we applied the ROI. In 9 months of working with part training and part group coaching, we had accrued $4 million in closed projects. And it was always such a, it's a bona fide, there were so many other benefits. Like you've mentioned, there's the unknown unknowns that come along in corporate transformation, but people were taking pride. Their projects were finishing, their confidence was increasing, the bottom line was getting better. And since that day, I've actually paid for ROI studies. So it's really cool for those coaches who are listening. If you can get ROI studies attached to your work, it's a boost. And so you want to be watching WBEX for their ROI coaching. Is it a certification program or a training?
Well, I think right now I'm in the pilot stage, and they're going to be having an enhanced version. We're familiar with that. It looks like I'm not quite sure whether they're going to go right through to certification or not.
Okay.
But even if you can, even I think even just getting the training is really crucial in terms of being able to figure out how do I capture that, how do I set it up so I can really capture the qualitative aspects of it, and seeing some of the case studies that I've seen that Lisa Ann Edwards has put together as examples are incredibly powerful in terms of what the story that you can then tell about the impact. You know, like we know what it's like to be able to talk about the intangible impact. Oh, my clients get more confidence. They feel more confident. That's great. What is the impact of that? What does that allow them to do? And how do you measure all of that? Well, again, we've got to start with where they are.
That's exactly where you start. In fact, one of the ROI studies that we attached to one of my engagements, I was working with a political strategist in Washington, D.C., who is working with a lot of nonprofits and helping them negotiate transformation in their organization by going out and being able to transform relationships with donors and other people who would assist them in supporting their cause. And through my coaching to him, he was able to do his coaching, which gave an ROI to this group of 6,000 times. It was a 6,000% ROI on what they were paying him for his consultation, or I was coaching him to do the consultation, and the benefit at the end of the row. It was so gratifying to see those numbers come in and to see this nonprofit flourish. Okay, so we've given a good commercial for ROI. Why don't we start to wind down, Carrie, if you would, and maybe you can co-create with me. Let's maybe do a brainstorm and see if we can get to 10. I don't know if we can or not, but let's play with the 10 things that people might not realize, but it would be helpful if they are interested in coaching toward cultural transformation. And I'll go ahead and start. One is, we said blatantly, find out who the key stakeholders are, but I would say what Carrie said, find out what success looks to them. Actually let them write the objectives of what they're going for. So that would be one tip. Mm-hmm. You have another one?
Let's see. So we talked about so much. Let's see, the tip, find out what success, absolutely what success means to them. You said it, I think embedded in that is talk to the person who has decision-making authority.
Make sure you're in front of them and that they sign off. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, who else is affected?
Ooh, yes. Great.
What will that mean to them? You know, when we're talking about cultural change, we're talking about, typically we're talking about it's the people that are working around you, underneath you, for the organization. How will they be affected?
Yes, I like that. Another one is be open to and be nimble, that if you have to adjust after a few months of working and go back to the original objectives, that's not failure. That just means you can't see what you can't see from the starting point. You have to be in the water swimming to be able to know what the temperature is or the depth is. Mm-hmm. What else would you do?
I love that, Lynn, because it showcases that we're always talking about a dynamic here. So we can't actually know the exact endpoint. This is not a mathematical equation. I mean, if anything, it's a quantum theory. It's a quantum. We're talking thing in quantums, perhaps. I'm not even positive that's a good analogy, but just to say that if we get our heads out of binary thinking,
right,
in order to be that nimble and to be responsive, it is to be that flexible. And so curiosity is really, if you can bring curiosity to your engagements, you'll be able to help them bring curiosity to where it is they're going to go. Cultural transformation, I don't think there's a single end goal. We can have the goals that we perceive, and
Right.
the feel, and also that the goal needs to have an emotion to it. It's not just a static, logic-driven goal. There's an
Yeah.
emotion that needs to attach to that goal for cultural transformation to really take place.
Well, I've counted 5 so far. Do you think we can get to another 5 if we
Oh, I
brainstorm
think
a bit?
so.
Okay. I've got another one on the tip of my tongue then. And that would be to, what I like to do is make sure that the people I'm working with have some kind of journal or a log or email that's expected. So we get to see the minutia of how they're applying the things
Yes.
that we are talking about in our sessions so that they actually get to practice. And like you said earlier, it's not just lip service. So some sort of tracking system for them to see and for you to see the progress.
I love that, Lynn, because it does a couple of things. It can open the door for actually tracking those results, and it really taps into that whole notion of reflexive practice.
Mm,
It's when we reflect in action, in practice, is where the real learning takes place. Where we're reflecting on how is it going, what have I learned, what will I do differently or the same next time. I love that. That's an amazing tool.
awesome. What else would you add to our list? We're up to 6 now.
Yeah. Um, I think in tandem with that, that it's a journey, not a sprint.
Ooh, say more about that.
Well, it's a longer term journey. So if we think it's a sprint, that we can do this in 90 days, yes, we can achieve a heck of a lot in 90 days. And we wanted to go beyond that. So when I think about a sprinter, you think about somebody, the 100-meter race in the Olympics. Where does the runner stop? Do they stop at the finish line? No. They stop a good 20 meters beyond the finish line, right? Because they're on the through line. So it's like the phrase that I like that this a scholar in negotiation talks about: negotiation as if implementation matters. When you start with that standpoint of negotiating as if implementation matters, you don't really end when the shaking of the hand or the deal gets done, quote unquote. You see through that to the other side of things. And so a 90-day sprint is a great start. But we're talking about something that we're leaving behind when we as the coach, as the practitioner who's been brought in to help with that change transformation, we're not sticking around probably after that sort of job is done-ish, or maybe we are. Maybe that's part of the tip there, is we want to look at how do we stick around? How do we continue to help them? More importantly, how do they continue to take this out into the world?
Right.
I'm not a parent, but I know, I've got parents all around me in my family, that when we send our kids out into the world, we don't just, most of the time we're not just simply hanging up our shingle and saying that's it, don't ever come home again. But they're out there now living their lives, and we want to have the faith and the trust that they are going to do the right thing, that they've learned what they need to learn to go out there in the world and be a productive, loving, good adult contributing to the world. Right? I hope that's what we're all aiming for.
We are. Yes, and so I'm going to segue onto that. Amen to what you're saying. In one of these organizations that I'm starting to wrap up, we're bringing somebody who's been trained as a coach, who is an employee, in to potentially continue the learning curve, because we know as long as coaching is there, the learning keeps happening. It's not like training where you throw something at them and then hope they retain it. So I love that you brought that point up. I think celebration is always a
Yes.
fabulous thing, and a recap. And if you can hand them an ROI or give them a study or something where they not, and I also like to challenge them to tell me what worked and were the opportunities. So some sort of completion and ceremony of celebration. What's another tip that you would give?
Well, I get in line with that celebration, absolutely fabulous, is helping them plan out, helping what is next for them, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So that implementation piece, I guess I'm coming back to that too, is getting more granular with that, is helping them plan out the future. You know, I mean, what happens when something happens? You know, how will they manage that? What did they give them thought to? That, you know, is from a coach's perspective, that could lead to further work. It might not. You know, I think we've got to bless that and let it go. But if we give them the right tools and set them up in the right way, like you talked about having a journal, how will they continue that practice? How will that continue to support them? What can they do to um, continue building on that? You
Right.
know, the culture, the beautiful thing about culture in organizations is it's driven by its people. And so, of course, one of the fastest changes can be, what if that leader leaves?
Mm.
Then what?
Yeah.
How does that legacy, so thinking about it from that perspective, how do they create a legacy that will last beyond their tenure or the executive team's tenure, for example? How will people continue that on?
Really good questions. Well, Carrie, as our time grows to an end, is there anything that you feel like you would like to add that we haven't spoken of?
Hmm. Gosh, I feel like we've covered quite a lot, and at the
Yeah.
same time, you know, we could spend a lot more time. I
That's
know.
so true.
You know, Lynn, I think back to the work that you and I both did in when we were coming through conversational intelligence, and you know, it's always coming back to that one word in all of our conversations, in all of our relationships, especially at work, and that is trust.
It really does. We're either, whatever we do, and Judith taught us well about this through her conversational intelligence curriculum, you're either building trust or breaking it down in all you do and all you say. And so being very aware of that, I'm glad you're bringing that in.
Mhm.
Um, and one last thing I would say is for those of you who are listening, I use the rule of three because it seems to work for me. It's either 3 sessions, 3 months, 3 weeks. You don't see the pendulum shift in coaching as quickly as you might in some other methodology because it's organic and it gets right to the roots. And it's changing the neural networks within each individual, who then changes their behaviors, and they start to change the dynamic, as you said earlier, with the team. And so when you're going for cultural change, you do need a longer runway. Would you not agree?
I would, yeah. I totally agree, Lynn. I know that, you know, you can have that moment when it seems like the pennies drop and an awareness has just opened something up and it's cracked something wide open, and that seems like a massive change. It's just the beginning.
Is. And so if you see that first shift, maybe it's three
Keep
weeks,
going.
revisions, 3 months, but keep going. In my work, it takes 1 to 2 years to complete a cycle of transformation to a point where maybe you do this and hand the keys over to the next person, but it takes time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Carrie, we are going to pass people on to you. What's your favorite way of having people connect with you if they're interested in learning more about what you do?
Well, then there's a couple of fun ways. I'm often on LinkedIn, and you can find me. Just look for Carrie Gallant on LinkedIn. Well, it should come up top on the search bar. My website is gallantleader.com.
Love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And would you quickly tell us who's your key client? Who are you looking for?
thank you. Well, you know, I love working with organizations that are really wanting to create new and they want to create change. They want to create a new and exciting way of moving forward. So I'm often working with CEOs and executive leaders in those organizations, small to medium sized, some large global companies, but in the probably in the Fortune 100 type of size, and individual leaders in the upper management up to the CEO level. When I'm working one-on-one with people, so I always like to find people who are really interested to really move the needle in their career, in their organization, towards something that is positive.
You're the right person for that, for sure.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your time and energy today. And indeed, if you've been interested in something that Carrie has said, please reach out to her.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's been a delight to chat with you, and lovely to chat with your audience out there too. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.